am Katie Kapler. I am co-founder and CEO of Inscribe. So we are sponsoring the event today, and I'll tell you a little bit about our product in a second. But more importantly, I have two amazing panelists with me today, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So Tanya, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here and be able to share a little bit of my thoughts around this topic. My name is Tanya Means, and I am the Assistant Dean for Educational Innovation and Chief Learning Officer at the Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And I lead our team of teaching and learning experts who help our faculty with their online teaching.
Thank you so much for being here, Tanya. And also, Omid, let us know a little bit about yourself.
Good to be here with everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. The best way to describe myself is by saying that I'm a fish trying to climb a tree. I've heard the expression that you can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. That's basically where I am at. So I'm currently occupying a position of a director of learning innovation at WGU Labs, which is a phenomenal R&D institute affiliated with Western Governors University. But the reason why I feel like a fish is because my training and the place where I spent my focus for the past 15 to 20 years is in primary theoretical research focused on belonging. And that's where I feel most resonant, which is why I'm always happy to be part of these conversations that Katie invites me to. Happy to be here.
We always love having you. So I love the perspectives that both of you bring. I know we're going to have an amazing conversation today. I'm just going to take 1 second. If you're not familiar with Inscribe and what we do, I'm just going to take a quick second to describe a little bit about our work, and that will help you understand why this topic is really important to us as well. So we help institutions build virtual communities in higher education. So Inscribe is a community platform, and really our mission is to create spaces, particularly for non-traditional students who we work with a lot, but to create spaces that are highly flexible and adaptable, where students can come together to meet with each other, to meet with faculty and staff at their institution. And it's really about, finding support, getting questions answered, building relationships and increasing sense of belonging, and creating equitable access to information and individuals for all students across an organization and institution. So we believe very strongly in the power of human connection to drive student outcomes. So we always describe ourselves as a human-first technology-enabled platform. But we also do a little bit of work with AI, and we think, how can we leverage tools like AI and generative AI to improve those three outcomes that I talked about? So better access to support, better connections with humans, and more equitable access. So it's things that we're thinking about all the time and every day. And so I'm excited to learn a little bit from our panelists today, and also from the audience. So again, feel free to contribute as we go along. We have been asked in the past to level set a little bit before we get into these conversations. So I'm not going to attempt to define generative AI, but I will just say, I think everybody here has probably played around with some version of generative AI in the last year and a half. But I also will say we can widen the conversation beyond just that capability. AI exists in lots of different shapes and forms. So I invite everybody to think broadly about the application of these types of technologies in education and in human connection. So we can think about that as we have this conversation. And the second is this topic of sense of belonging, which I'm very happy to see has become much more front and center in the narrative of what people are talking about in higher education. So I think as a concept, it's not quite as mysterious as maybe it was a year or 2 years ago. We have often used the definition of belonging as feeling connected to, and also feeling valued, accepted, and heard by the individuals around you, or by your institution. Omid, you have a much deeper understanding of this than I do, and I know, Tanya, you've thought a lot about this. So feel free to add to that definition or augment that definition as we move through the conversation today. But just to get us started, one of the things I would like to talk about is this idea of how AI can be brought into the teaching and learning environment, maybe not as a direct way to impact belonging, but so it's altering the environment in a way that still has implications for how maybe students are interacting with each other, or faculty are being able to interact with students. And I know we've talked about a few of examples of this. So Tanya, I'm going to have you kick us off. How do you see AI being brought into this space, and where do you think it's taking us?
Yeah, thanks for that start of our conversation, Katie. I think one of the things that is really challenging, especially when you look at some of the scale of online education, is how to keep that human connection between the instructors and the students, and between the students and the students. And so when we start thinking about AI as an augmentation to an instructor's capabilities, we start to recognize ways that the instructor can focus on things that are really best done by the human, and the other tools can come along and help to support the things that get much more challenging as you get more and more students in the audience. And so when we start thinking about the implications for connections, the ways in which we encourage students to connect with each other and engage in the content, engage with each other, and engage with the instructor, we start to see that there are tools that can help to bring that about in a more natural way, in an authentic way. For one simple example would be, if I have a small group of, say, 20 to 30 students, and I ask them to go to some kind of a discussion tool, and I ask them to talk to each other, it's more likely that they will be able to consume all of the content that's in that forum, that they'll be able to identify with students who are similar to them or have information that they want to build on or share. But then you start getting into these courses that have, say, 800 or 1,000 students in them. It's impossible to imagine how those students would feel a sense of connection, because they can't even consume all of the content. And so if we look at ways that artificial intelligence can augment the instructor's ability to connect students, and that environment can then nudge students towards each other or highlight things that might be more relevant to them, it starts to help to build those connections, and it allows for us to return to some of the more pedagogically sound ways that we would have taught in smaller environments.
I love that idea that, yes, I mean, I love the way that you phrase that, by you can take this experience that is huge and maybe daunting and overwhelming, and you can actually make it feel more personal and more small and accessible, simply by simplifying the way that information is transferred, or giving the faculty member the tool set to do that. What do you think, Omid? What are you seeing in this space, or what's some of the work you guys are doing at labs around this area?
At first, just a comment that I love the augmentation framing as an optimistic perspective, because certainly as we talk about AI, there's a lot of doom and gloom, also about it taking over and destroying humanity and society as we know it. So that augmentation view, I think, is a balanced counter view to some of that scary narrative. But the fact is that we don't know, right? AI is still very new on the scene, and it certainly is taking on different forms, and it's being implemented in different ways by different groups. And like any tool, which is what AI is, it's a tool. It will depend on how the users use it. The hope is that, as we've mentioned, that the augmentation strategy and approach is the primary approach that drives its growth and evolution, which is to say that we offload the lower level tasks that require a lot of laborious thought and process and time to the AI, freeing us up to do the human connection that it's harder to be replaced by AI. That's the hope, and we're starting to see signs of that and some examples of that, as you can imagine, with some course recommendations and tutoring. AI is showing some really great possibilities of personalizing the learning experience in a way that a human couldn't, because they can't constantly be sitting right next to you, watching how you're doing and how you're learning and providing immediate feedback. We're also seeing some AI having some positive aspects in terms of assessment. One of the things that we take for granted is that our educational system is structured in such a way that we teach the content and then we test to gauge learning. But that testing experience is actually quite aversive and something that taxes both the instructor and the student. What if you could outsource that to AI, where you have something like direct assessment through AI, where it could observe you as you're doing the testing, and therefore freeing up the faculty or the instructor from having to play that policing role. And that again helps to sustain and protect that relationship between the student and the instructor. So there's a lot of really early signs of promising ways in which we can offload these taxing responsibilities that corrode that authentic human relationship, that has the potential to get us to a point where, as we've mentioned, you can focus on the things that do matter, which is that human interaction that is at the heart of learning. But I also want to just put this in the caveat that we're still very, very early on. And so there's a lot that we don't know, and we don't know how it's going to be used. And so it's interesting to see where we end up with some of these.
I think one of the other things to highlight is the idea that with learners all over the world and participating at different times, the asynchronicity will often help people or cause people to feel disconnected, or say on an island learning on their own. And with an AI augmentation, we now can have more immediate feedback for learners as they're struggling. We can use those tools to identify students who are struggling maybe sooner than we would have otherwise. And we can allow them to be engaged at a time and a place in which they are most ready to learn, or maybe even struggling the most, to be able to help them. And so having your artificial intelligence assistant beside you while you're struggling through a really difficult problem in the course will help the student to feel more like, I belong here because I can actually do this work, as opposed to feeling like I'm lost, I don't know where to go, and I have to wait until 24 hours for the instructor to respond to my question that I posted somewhere else.
Right. And then you've been sitting with that anxiety for 24 hours, and it's building up. I've also heard in many conversations, and we see this even in our own work, that AI can help confront that intimidation factor, which is partly, raising your hand in the classroom, but we even hear from students just going directly one-on-one to a teacher, a faculty member, can make me feel, I don't want to admit to them that I didn't understand what was being brought up in the class, right? Or they're going to think less of me because I'm doing that. And if you think about how corrosive that can be for connection and belonging, even if it's not real, just the perception that that might be there. So finding ways to kind of move around that or build confidence so that you can then have those direct conversations would be great.
Can I just say one more comment? Tanya mentioned the notion that you can feel like you belong once you develop a sense of competence. And I think that's actually a really important comment to unpack, which is that belonging actually is quite complex. We tend to think about it a little bit too narrowly in terms of the quality and the nature of the human interactions and relationships that we have with our peers and our mentors and faculty, teachers. But there's also this notion of belonging that comes when you come to see yourself as being worthy and capable in an environment. And I think as you think about it from that broader definition, when AI actually can help to nourish a sense of belonging if it helps you get the personalized support that you need in a timely fashion that avoid exactly what you just mentioned, Katie, which is to avoid that very awkward conversation where you have to go into your faculty's room or office and say, I don't know how to do this. And it will have prepped you so that you can feel a bit more competent, so that you can engage more meaningfully in those interactions. So belonging, I think, is actually a multi-dimensional construct. And sometimes it comes from being able to see yourself as an agentic contributor in this domain, independent of your social connections as well. So that's one thing I just want to put on the floor there.
Great point. Danielle, I saw the question come in. Would you like us to address that? Because I was
Yeah.
going to move forward, but it's very related to what we're talking about now.
No, so we had a question come in directly to the host and the panelists. Omid, you had mentioned direct assessment instead of quizzes, exams using AI. Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, I think this notion of if you take it to the extreme, internships as a mechanism for learning is starting to take some recognition that there is a lot of value there. We're also realizing that sometimes testing in the moment as you're learning is a great way. So direct assessment is essentially that, is as you're going through the learning, there's opportunities to be prompted to make sure that you know what you know, instead of waiting for a quiz at a separated and distinct location to test recall. And that's different from learning at times. So AI can, if you can imagine it being a companion in your learning at all times, can really gauge whether or not you're grasping onto the core concepts in a meaningful way. And at times learning can be on the job or hands-on kinds of demonstrations, as opposed to just content that you learn from a textbook. And so direct assessment can be enabled through AI. I don't know if you've seen a new version of AI called Gemini from Google, but it utilizes not just text, but video and audio and text as a mechanism of interaction. So it's as close to having a human interaction as you can. And I think that's kind of where we're headed with all of this. And if you understand that that's a functionality that's available, then it really helps us to redesign what does the learning experience look like? What does the testing experience look like from a ground up design perspective that is not what we've been dealing with in the past. So there's a lot of really exciting possibilities here.
Everyone
also
out there is
starting to
Googling
see-
Gemini right now. Sorry,
Oh,
Tanya.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal. There's a promo video on it, so I encourage you to check it out.
Sorry, Tanya, please go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I think we're also starting to see some really good examples of ways we can have things like simulations or debates or back and forth conversations with chatbots and other tools, where we can start to see where maybe a question, a prompt is provided, and the student responds with a partially correct or misconception response, instead of that just going into a quiz where it's like, nope, that's just wrong, or kind of passing by it because they guessed the right answer. The prompts can then be reflecting that that student has a misconception or has partially answered correct, but is missing some key elements. And so if we have that ability to have that interaction real time, one-on-one with students, then that caters to their needs and helps them, just as we've talked about already, develop that sense of confidence, develop that sense of, I know what I'm doing, or maybe if I don't know what I'm doing, I have the support to get to where I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think both of you started to touch on the next question I was going to ask, both in what you were just saying, Tanya, and then also in this idea of AI enabling a sense of competence and competence enabling a sense of belonging, which is, so one of the ways we can talk about AI and belonging is AI is impacting teaching in ways that then open up new opportunities for faculty to interact with each other and students to interact with each other. But do you also see ways that people are more directly applying AI to the concept of connection and belonging? That makes sense, sort of coming at it as, I guess, a direct application to try and facilitate these feelings of, competence, connection, acceptance, and so forth. Omid, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure, yeah. There's some really great examples already. I think what you all are doing with Inscribe is actually one of the things that can happen and be an enabling component of a sense of connection and belonging, which is connecting to others that you may not otherwise be able to connect with, right? So I think your platform and AI and Maybe even think about like dating apps, right? Like they allow you to connect to people that otherwise you may not be able to. And the algorithms in the background are able to do a lot of the computing and the filtering to help you better match with the people that you're trying to connect with. And so I think there's sort of an enabling component there. There's also, as you think about connection, increasingly we live in a world that's more and more diverse, which means that communication is sometimes challenging. And now, not to put like another plug for a product, but I think the Android phones have an AI that immediately translates one language to another. So as you're talking in real time, you can talk to anyone in any language in any part of the world, and they will hear you in their native language. So another great example of how AI and technology and tools essentially are breaking down the barriers of connection that allow us to have those meaningful connections and the sense of belonging. So there's a lot of really great examples that are possible that just was not a possibility 5 years ago. And that's just a couple to name a few.
Such a great example, because the language barrier is one that I think forever was just perceived to be impossible to cross, at least not without a lot of very awkward pauses that reduces the value of that conversation. So the idea of thinking about these intractable, what were used to be sort of intractable separations, and that technology can just leap over them almost instantaneously, is such a cool and interesting idea. Tanya, what are you thinking when you reflect on this?
Yeah, I think we're seeing just the very beginning of some really exciting ways in which AI can help with those connections. I mean, we used to talk when Amazon first came out and would start to put together ratings and things that you might like, and these things go together. But we're seeing so much more places where that's being reflected in other platforms and with other tools to try and bring people together. I talked about that earlier, that is there a way we can nudge people to connect with other people that may have similar ideas or even similar needs, and trying to bring those people together to be able to connect and have conversations. And the other thing that I think happens, and because we have so much familiarity with some of these social media platforms, people are used to the idea of there's a lot out there and I can't consume it all. So I'm going to kind of just scroll through until something catches my eye. And one of the things I think that these platforms can start to do is, how can we make something that is relevant to one person more noticeable and more attractive to them, so that they will stop scrolling and start interacting. And so I think that we need to start finding ways to help manage the idea that people spend a lot of their passive time just scrolling. So what can we do to get them to stop and engage?
I'm sure that's something that they are actively working on. But what's really cool about this is that there are places where a lot of this has been happening for a long time, as you both point out. And the idea that education is maybe a little bit slower to adopt some of these ideas, but now that we're seeing all these relevant applications of some of these same concepts and technologies in the classroom or in the program or across the university, I think is really exciting. One of the things that we think about, we touched on it a little bit earlier, is that in any given space or community, you always have individuals who are reluctant to step forward and participate for a variety of reasons, but often, anxiety or worry or not feeling like they have the right thing to say. And we're really interested in also the idea of AI through understanding what's happening in these spaces, maybe understanding a little bit about you, being able to surface, I think to your point, Tanya, very targeted information about what's happening, so you feel that what's happening in these spaces is really relevant to me, or I can see people like me are engaging, so I'm more likely to come and engage. Can we actually draw in a broader population of people to participate? So I feel like philosophically that's going to work, but I think we have we have to prove out that model over time.
I think one other thing
the idea of gamification.
Sometimes, especially in learning environments, we recognize the need to gamify things because what isn't assessed or what isn't given points isn't done. And so I think there's sometimes this hesitancy to say, I'm going to give points if you react to a particular post, or if you respond, or if you post. I think we need to get a little bit past that to be able to recognize that sometimes it takes a little bit of that to get the ball rolling, to get momentum, and to get people to start to engage. And then once they do engage because of the points, they start to recognize the value, and it goes beyond just the need for the points in order to fulfill a requirement for the course.
Yeah, you need to get that first thing, cross that first line, and then the rest becomes a little bit simpler. We talked a little bit about social media. I think one of I don't know if it's concerns or cautions maybe that we've seen in those spaces is that AI algorithms, they can often, in the interest of connecting you with like-minded people, create these insulated bubbles where you're only talking to people who think like you and talk like you. And how do you think about ways that we could leverage similar technology to actually expand people's connections and bring a more diverse set of students together? Or another way to think about it, like, are you worried about that as AI comes, that we're just going to kind of do again what happened in Facebook and some of these other platforms? Omi, what do you think?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's, again, one of those things that's, we'll see, I think. One thing that you've touched on is the fact, as we understand how AI works, is it essentially harvests the data and the text that it can scrape off the internet, which means that there's a bias towards representing the data that already exists, which means that the groups that have been historically most represented in these platforms are the ones that AI is now going to be using to represent its content. Now, why that's important to iterate, it seems a bit obvious, is because generative AI is creating new content at a pace that could exceed the human's ability to create that content, which means that if we sort of fast forward 5 years from now, the current content that lives on the internet is almost like the alphabet that it uses to construct a whole new language, if you will. And that bias that exists right now can only be augmented into what it generates, which we then consume at a higher rate. And so there's definitely a recognition that there's going to be a biased representation of different groups in different ways using the existing content that's out there that the AI will only accentuate. You're seeing some intentional strategies to offset that. There's a platform called Black GPT, which is exactly trying to counter the fact that there's an underrepresentation of individuals who are persons of color in the way that OpenAI is using or generating text. And so they're very explicitly sourcing with a bias towards more diverse groups to create generative AI that is more representative of those groups' experiences and perspectives. There's also some work going into, as you think about AI, and this is getting into the weeds, but there is actually a set of codes that it's programmed with that are essentially like, the 10 Commandments of moral conduct based on what it should and should not represent. And there's a lot of things that it's told not to do. But we don't yet know how robust and resilient that set of pillars of moral structures that we programmed the AI with will hold up into the future. So there's a lot of finding, there's a lot of discovery still at hand here. And we may want to investigate that with a lens on equity and with a lens on bias as we move forward and generative AI continues to generate even more content. So I think that's an interesting domain to be looking at with all of this. But again, I think there's also the positive. We've mentioned a few benefits, right? If it helps to break down barriers that otherwise would prevent individuals from diverse groups from actually interacting, that's a great thing. But we can't be blind to the fact that it does come with a lot of limitations and potential hazards that unless we're intentional about, it could cause harm for certain groups.
And I think the lesson that we're taking into our work here is that you can't just sort of build something and then walk away from it. So number one, transparency, I think, is key. That any company you're working with that is using AI or starting to incorporate AI, make sure that you really understand how it is. Transparency is something that you should demand in all aspects of that relationship. And then the other is just as a good steward, as a provider of that service, that you're actually watching to see, what is it doing? What relationships is it building? What information is it serving? And have ownership over the fact that you have accountability for that. And if it's not behaving appropriately, or if it's not giving you the outcomes that you're looking for, that you're taking steps to augment that and change that. But that does rely on each individual organization to take on that responsibility and feel that sense of ownership. So to your point, Omid, time will tell a little bit in that space. Tanya, what do you think?
I think one of the things that AI will allow us to do is to have more scale in our programs. And as we have more scale in both our courses and our programs, we start to be able to accept more and more diverse backgrounds into our courses. And that allows for more voices, different voices. And with that, then the AI itself as a connector is not so much giving information that's biased, but maybe using, especially if we're able to set up models so that they're coming from a known source or from a library that has been developed based on some of these more responsible and ethical ideas, we can start to bring people together and just start conversations, and then the humans actually take it from there. And I think that's one of the things that we can encourage and support moving forward.
That's such a good point. Like, if we really want to improve diversity, we have to start with a diverse pool that we're, working from. And then one of the things I find encouraging to that end as well, Tanya, is that when we look at all the like, for example, when we look in our communities and we see that there are similar things that students are talking about or thinking about, the diversity of those topics is really enormous. Like, it could be anything from what state do I live in, to the fact that I have kids at home, to the fact that I have math anxiety. And a lot of those traits, we think, cut across some of these traditional backgrounds. And so you're not zeroing in on just one sort of angle of how we might bring people together, but really looking at this multi-dimensional model of how you might find connections between students. And that's really hard to do just as a human, right? If you don't have the technology that will allow you to have that complex perspective and think about how to do that in a different way, you're never going to get there. To your point about even the faculty member with 400 students, trying to keep all that information in your brain and take action on it is almost impossible. So with an AI backbone to help you out, I think we can get there more successfully.
I think one other thing to highlight is that a lot of times with our residential programs, even if we have courses that are, 300 students in a lecture hall, most of those students are never going to feel comfortable raising their hand or saying whatever they would want to voice. Maybe not even to the person sitting right next to them under their breath. So if we can give them platforms and tools to be able to share their ideas without that feeling of anxiety of what is everybody going to think and how are they going to look at me if I say these things. I mean, we still want the ideas to be kind or to be appropriately presented. But once we start giving more people voices, we're going to reveal more of that diversity in our classrooms. And giving platforms, even when we are teaching in residential environments, giving platforms to allow more students to have a voice, I believe brings out more of the diverse backgrounds and experiences of the students.
100%. I love that. Well, and this kind of touches on where we wanted to go with our final question, which is, are there I mean, are there? That's not the way to phrase it. So there clearly are going to be issues and considerations around equity and access. And there's been a lot of discussion that I've heard, almost debate, about whether the rise of some of these AI and technology tools will improve that or widen the gap. So I'm kind of curious about where you guys think we might be going on this issue. Are there things that keep you up at night as you think about this particular topic, or what makes you excited about the future here? Tanya, why don't you start us off on this one?
Well, one of the kind of key pillars of our purpose at the Geese College of Business is democratizing education and expanding access to as many learners as we possibly can, trying to open up the doors to educational opportunities through a variety of different methods. Some of them are degrees, but all the way down to individual pieces of content that we want people to learn from. And so one of the things that I see us being able to, or needing to be able to do in order to bring that educational opportunity to the world, is to find more ways of either creating content more quickly, creating relevant content more quickly, and or giving that same content to targeted individuals so that they know that that content is relevant for them. We're able to do some of that on our MOOC platforms, where we're able to share out content and a lot of people see it and they can join it. We have millions of learners in our MOOCs. But we want to find even more ways that we can put more content out there, but also bring more learners to that content. And I think generative AI is going to be able to do some of that to help and expand that audience even further.
Great point. And if reach is your goal and diversity is your goal, trying to power that exclusively through humans is, I mean, it's just not cost effective. Like, you're never going to actually achieve that. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Omi, what would you add?
I'm trying to contain myself here.
Pick your top three.
So let me just piggyback on what Tanya said. I do think this access point is critical, right? Because I think as we think about education as a vehicle to upward social mobility and to fruitful sort of support and affordance for one's lifestyle and a contribution to society, it's who gets in and who completes that matters. And as we know, historically, those have not been equitable in our society. And so thinking about what are the barriers to access, I think technology and AI have interesting promise here, because they allow you to literally access your learning from a location that maybe for some is not accessible, at a time that for some is not convenient, in a format that isn't conducive to everybody in every group. And so I think technology and AI have some really powerful potential here in serving equity in ways that our traditional institutions may have struggled. And so I think institutions that really embrace this technology is great. But where I'll go on my soapbox here is as we think about other things, but as we think about the role of education and equity, we have to realize that, in Claude Steele's words, there are identity contingencies that are blocking certain groups from feeling like they are permitted or accepted in that environment, which is to say that there are structural characteristics within our institutions that either make you feel like you do belong or you don't belong. And these contingencies, I think we've assumed, are just there to be accepted, and that we have to find ways to help them navigate around those barriers. But if we really wanted to get at the core of it, it's a really important design question around how do you redesign the higher ed institution to get rid of those contingencies altogether. So not try to patch it or create a band-aid with technology or supports, but restructure and reform higher ed such that those contingencies are no longer there, such that every group graduates and has access to education that is proportionate to the representation in the population. The fact that we still have equity gaps in a consistent way, even when you equate for SES, suggests that there are still some barriers within the higher ed context that are inequitable, that we've just accepted. And I think this is where I go off a little bit, but I think it's an interesting time to think about, can we redesign the way higher ed looks, given some of the tools that are accessible that haven't been accessible in the past? I don't know if any of that makes sense, but I think that's sort of my view on this.
It does, and it's and obviously a big picture, big undertaking idea. But I think a lot of people are thinking about that and talking about that and trying to build some alternative pathways. What we see a lot of is people going around the organizations going around the education system to try some of these experiments, I think, rather than people being as successful in the traditional models. But if there's success, eventually the traditional models will get there as well. I think that's related. So a question came in. I'm going to do my best to summarize it, but I think it's very much related to what you were just saying, Umid. So apologize if I butcher this, but so many students from diverse backgrounds are immigrants and are acculturated to Western ideas and use of Western language to express themselves. Do you think the algorithms will be able to distinguish between them and others who are diverse but not acculturated to Western ideas? So since we're using LLMs in higher ed, can it weigh the ideas equally and provide space for both of them? I think the question is, and tell me if I'm getting this right, the question is around, if you're used to talking and expressing and using language that isn't just how the Western world works, will your ideas be able to be understood and acknowledged and like given validity in some of these toolings and in these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of defer to my standard response, which is I don't know. But what's interesting about this question is that it actually touches on some of the arguments that a lot of the doomsday prophecy makers are touching on, which is that actually, given the pace at which AI has been able to understand and master language, far exceeds our humans' capabilities of being able to do that same thing. So if anything, the fear comes from AI being so efficient at capturing and understanding and representing the essence of sentiment and thought and emotion through diverse languages, that people are scared that that's where AI can go awry, is that because it taps in essentially to the operating system of humanity through language. So I think if I had to base any merit to those arguments and answer the question, I would say that I actually would anticipate that AI would do a great job of minimizing the disconnects between a core understanding of languages. We may not be there yet, but if I have any predictions, I would say AI can actually achieve that in a pretty sophisticated way in a relatively quick time span. I don't necessarily endorse again the doomsday prophecy makers, which is to say that AI will, and there's a term for it that essentially we will become hacked humans such that AI will know us better than we know ourselves. And therefore, it will make recommendations for who we date, who we should vote for, all of these things that, we will defer to AI because it is so intuitive in tapping into our operating system, which is our language. And I think, while that highlights its a potential ability to be able to understand language in very sophisticated ways, I still think it's a bit exaggerated from a prediction perspective. So to answer your question, I think AI could help to bridge the gaps, and I'm kind of keen to see when we get there.
Yeah, interesting. Well, there's another question in here from Mabel, so I'll throw this out to you both, which is sort of the flip side of that, which is to say, because you mentioned, Omid, it's going to tap into our operating system. We'll look to it for advice on all these things, but we've also acknowledged that the larger, more traditional tools out there have these biases built in based on the content that they were built on top of. So what would be your advice, Tanya and Omid, in terms of helping students understand that and equipping them with the right I lost the word, but like they're thinking critically about the information that's coming back to them from these systems. So everything isn't just accepted at face value, but they're also running it through some sort of assessment to know, like, how do I know if what I'm getting is authentic, is biased, is influenced in some way?
Well, I think one
When
of the
you tell me
things
this, it'll be helpful for my kids. All right, right down here.
I think one of the things that's really important to recognize is that we fear the unknown. If it's left as an unknown, we're going to be more afraid of it. And there was another question in the chat about, instructors who are afraid of generative AI and bringing those tools into their classrooms. And I think this aligns with that. The idea that if we don't understand something, then we'll either be afraid to use it, or if we do use it, we may use it incorrectly or in ways that actually hurt us more than anyone else. So if I'm needing to learn calculus and I'm using generative AI to answer all of my calculus math questions, then I'm only hurting myself. But on the other hand, if I know how to use that tool and I can prompt the AI to tell me the step-by-step process for solving that type of problem, and then I do the work myself, it's actually enhanced my ability to learn because it's given me a framework to place what I'm learning into something that makes sense to me. And so if we can recognize the value of these tools and not be afraid of them and learn to use them, Ethan Mollick says you only learn how to use generative AI by using generative AI. The more we use it, the more we experience where the limitations are and where it doesn't work and where I need to bring my own thinking to bear and where it really works well. And I can use that as a tool to help me get further to better understand something. I think that is the piece. And as instructors, I think it is our duty to be transparent, but also to share with students mechanisms for using these tools and frameworks for thinking about these tools and ways in which they can be successful with these tools so that when they get out into the workforce, because they will need to use these tools out in the workforce, that's not the first time they're seeing it or the first time they're encountering a requirement to use these tools.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is it is our responsibility to incorporate not just the technology in the classroom, but an understanding of what this technology is, how to use it appropriately, what comes behind it. But you're absolutely right. That relates to the question that was asked earlier in the chat, if everyone saw it. If that is the responsibility of the institution, so I guess that's an open question, what do you do about all the faculty who are absolutely terrified of this or view it as like the enemy because they're just going to use it to get their calculus answers and then move on? Like, is there a way to help those individuals see it through a different lens?
I think one of the ways is just to help them with the mindset, because essentially what we've been doing all along with online education is we've been asking instructors who are really good in a particular area of expertise to be teachers. And then we've said, now, not only maybe you didn't have any preparation for how to teach in the residential space, but you figured it out. Now we want you to figure it out online and to do that without any further training in many cases. Yeah. And we're asking instructors to become something that they aren't in many cases. And so by providing them with support and expertise around how to use these tools and how to be effective and how to translate good pedagogical strategies into the expertise that they have in the subject area, it's that partnership between the experts that provides the best learning outcome for the students to be able to say, I have the expertise in topic X, and this person who's supporting me has the expertise in how to do that in an online environment or with generative AI or with this technological tool. And those two experts are working together to plan and design a learning environment that incorporates all of that. Then we're going to be successful because we're being able to use evidence-based strategies. We're being able to use, you have your expertise and I have mine, and we're bringing them together instead of asking an instructor to become a whole new thing on top of what they've already learned and have expertise in.
So supporting them with that professional development, with that expertise in the institution that they can partner with, which I do see a lot of higher ed organizations doing. In fact, I see a lot of that also in the K-12 space, where I think people are taking this topic very seriously as well. It's a little too late if you've already gotten to college and nobody's talked to you. Not too late, but start early, because I think these things are relevant at a much younger age. Omi, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, yeah, I think like any tool, there's sort of a responsible use component, right? So I think just to confirm what Tanya's saying, we should definitely be encouraging this. Its usage and understanding of how to use it and maximize its utility. This concept of prompt engineering, which is a fancy way of knowing how to speak the AI, is interesting because you can actually develop some pretty advanced and sophisticated prompts that give you exactly what you want. As an example, I have this like long list of quotes that I've been capturing and collecting for the past like 25 years. And it's all been in like a single Word doc. And it's as messy as you can imagine. What I decided to do was to copy and paste all of that. It was like 35 pages worth into ChatGPT with the prompt of, can you organize these quotes into a 3-column table by including the quote on one column, the author in the second column, and then a quick summary of the main theme in the third column. And lo and behold, it generated this beautiful table for me that would have taken me hours, hours, and it filled in the missing information, like if there was a missing author or, so there was really some really powerful things that I could only achieve it once I understood some basics in prompt engineering, like essentially just to use it. But then there's also the other side of knowing when not to use it, which is equally important, right? I was just talking to my wife. She, for Lent this year, was trying to decide what to give up. And I said, well, why don't you give up just mindlessly scrolling on your phone? And I said, employ better digital hygiene. And she said, digital hygiene? What in the world is that? I'm like, it's a thing. First of all, I know I've heard about it. It's a thing. You should look into it. But there might be a similar set of practices and principles for how we use AI, that there is a time where it actually does not augment learning, where it impedes or outsources the learning because it's so easy, it automates it. And so also knowing when it does and does not enhance what you're trying to achieve so that you can use it responsibly is also one of the content domains that we can really design and introduce to students and to faculty, by the way. So I think there's a lot of, just basic usage principles that people can benefit from.
You basically just reflected exactly what the post in the chat just said, which is, I know there's value to it. I also see students using it inappropriately. I'm trying to figure out that balance. And I think, what you've been saying all along too, Amit, is it's the early days. We're talking now about what we're seeing and what we're excited about or worried about, but things will change so quickly over the next few months and years that we could do the same talk every 3 months, and I think we would have new and different things to say. We have one more question coming in. Let me double check our time. Are there tools out there to assist with how to formulate the questions and help? So I think the question is around best practices in formulating prompts and questions in an AI. So I believe Tanya shared a resource in the chat. Is that right, Tanya, about prompting?
Yeah, there's a great prompt article from Ethan Mollick. Take a look through it. It gives actually a framework for asking questions, setting the context, providing the information needed, setting the AI as an agent or some kind of an expert to be able to help. The key thing to remember, and this is also highlighted in Ethan Mollick's article, is that at some point, these tools are going to be so good that we won't need any kind of prompt engineering. So don't run out and become a prompt engineer because it's going to be short. But for now, the idea of how we frame a question is really important. And another idea around that is that you just get better at it the more you do it. And so ask ChatGPT everything. And the more you start to ask those questions, the more you'll start to realize, oh, that was a really dumb way to word that. Or I didn't get what I wanted. I wonder why. Let me try again. And so you can go back and forth. And it doesn't have to be just one tool. You can use multiple tools and compare the results and see how those results either worked well or didn't work well.
Yeah, or different tools seem to be better at different contexts, and you start to learn those personalities of the different systems, if you will. Well, I know we're getting right up on time, so in the interest of honoring everybody's Valentine's Day, so you can get off to your next set of activities, I want to thank you again, Tanya and Omid, for being here. I always love hearing from you. Every time we do a webinar, I jot down a million notes to go follow up on myself afterward. So thank you again for being here. I just really appreciate you guys spending some time with us.